The fog was so thick that morning that Claire couldn't see past her own fence. She stood at the kitchen window, holding her coffee cup with both hands, watching the gray mist swallow everything beyond the porch. 2 years she'd been living in this cabin alone, and she still wasn't used to how quiet it got. The wood stove crackled behind her. Outside, her 3 chickens were making their morning noise, probably wondering why she hadn't brought their feed yet. She took another sip of coffee and tried to shake off the heaviness that always seemed to settle on her shoulders these days. Her husband Tom had built this cabin with his own hands. Every beam, every board. He'd been so proud of it. The mountains were his dream, he'd always said. Away from the noise and rush of the city. Just them, the trees and the sky. And for 5 beautiful years it had been perfect. Then came the accident. Claire pushed the memory away like she did every morning. There was work to do. The chickens needed feeding. The firewood was running low. The winter was coming fast and she could already feel it in the air. She pulled on her boots and her heavy coat and stepped outside. The knock came just as she reached for the chicken feed. 3 solid thumps on the front door, loud enough to startle her, loud enough to make her heart jump. Nobody came up here. The nearest neighbor was 5 miles down the mountain. The town was even further. People didn't just drop by for a visit. You had to really want to reach this place. Claire walked slowly back to the cabin, her boots crunching on the frosted ground. Through the fog, she could make out a shape on her porch. A big shape. A man. Her hand went to the door handle and she hesitated. Tom had taught her to be careful. They'd moved out here for peace, but that didn't mean the world was always safe. Still, running away wasn't in her nature. She'd been handling things alone for 2 years now. She could handle this. She opened the door. The man standing on her porch was massive, not just tall but broad, like he was carved from the same mountains that surrounded them. He had a thick beard, dark and wild, and hair that fell past his shoulders. His clothes were rough, practical. Heavy boots, worn pants, a jacket that looked like it had seen 1,000 storms. His hands were huge, scarred, weathered, but it was his eyes that caught her. They were clear, direct, and surprisingly gentle for such a rough-looking man. "Can I help you?" Claire asked, keeping her voice steady. The man looked at her for a long moment. Then he spoke, and his voice was deep, a little rusty, like he didn't use it much. "I was told you're alone," he said. "Let me give you sons, woman." Claire felt like she'd been slapped. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She just stared at him, trying to process what she'd just heard. Did he really just say that out loud, like it was the most normal thing in the world? The man stood there waiting like he expected an answer. "Excuse me?" Claire finally managed. "You need help," the man said, his tone matter-of-fact. "I can provide it. A woman alone in these mountains won't survive many more winters. You need sons, strong ones. I can give you that." The shock turned to anger fast. "Get off my property," Claire said, her voice low and hard. The man didn't move. He just looked at her with those calm eyes like he couldn't understand why she was upset. "I meant no disrespect," he said. "No disrespect?" Claire's voice rose. "You come to my home, a complete stranger, and say something like that, and you think that's not disrespectful?" "I'm being honest," the man said simply. "Most people waste time with games and pretty words that mean nothing. I don't know how to do that. I saw a problem. I offered a solution." Claire couldn't believe what she was hearing. This man was either completely insane or had been living in the woods so long he'd forgotten how to be human. "I don't need your solution," she said. "I need you to leave. Now." The man studied her for another moment, then gave a slight nod. "As you wish." He turned and walked off the porch, disappearing into the fog like a ghost. Claire stood there, gripping the doorframe, her heart pounding. She watched until she couldn't see him anymore, then quickly stepped inside and locked the door. Her hands were shaking as she set down her coffee cup. What just happened? Who was that man? And more importantly, who told him about her? She paced the small cabin, trying to calm down. The words kept echoing in her head. "I was told you're alone." Someone had been talking about her. Someone had sent this mountain man to her door with that absurd proposal. Claire moved to the window and peered out, but the fog revealed nothing. The man was gone, but the questions he'd left behind filled the cabin like smoke. She'd heard stories about him, she realized. The mountain man. People in town mentioned him sometimes, always in hushed tones like he was more legend than person. He lived somewhere deep in the wilderness, they said. Rarely came down. Kept to himself. Some folks said he was a hermit, maybe crazy. Others said he was just a man who wanted to be left alone. But nobody had ever said he went around making proposals like that. Claire sat down at her kitchen table, her mind racing. She should be furious. She was furious. But underneath the anger was something else. Curiosity, maybe, or worry. Because whoever had told him about her situation knew too much. Knew she was struggling. Knew she was alone. The fog started to lift as the morning wore on, revealing the mountains in all their autumn glory. The trees were turning gold and red, and the peaks were already dusted with snow. It was beautiful, like always. But today, Claire couldn't enjoy it. She kept thinking about the mountain man's face. He hadn't looked cruel or mocking. He'd looked serious, like he genuinely believed he was making a reasonable offer, like he was trying to help in the only way he knew how, which somehow made it even stranger. By afternoon, Claire had made a decision. She needed to go to town. She needed to find out who had been talking about her, and why they thought sending a wild mountain man to her door was a good idea. She hitched up her old truck and started the long drive down the mountain road. The vehicle rattled and groaned, and she made a mental note that it probably needed work she couldn't afford. Everything needed work she couldn't afford. The cabin roof was leaking. The fence was falling apart. The firewood she'd chopped herself was half of what she needed for winter. The truth was, she was barely holding on. Every day was a fight to keep the homestead running, to honor Tom's dream, to prove she could make it work. But it was getting harder, so much harder. Maybe that's why someone had talked. Maybe they'd seen her struggling and thought they were helping. But sending that man, with that proposal, that wasn't help. That was madness. The town appeared below as she rounded the final curve. Pine Ridge. Population 342, according to the sign. Small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, which meant someone definitely knew something about what happened this morning. Claire parked outside the general store and sat in the truck for a moment, gathering her courage. Then she climbed out and walked inside, ready to get some answers. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. Behind the counter, old Betty looked up and smiled, but there was something in her eyes. Something guilty, and Claire knew immediately. Betty was the one who'd talked. "Claire, honey," Betty said, her voice too cheerful. "What brings you to town today?" Claire walked straight to the counter and looked the older woman in the eye. "We need to talk," she said, "about the mountain man who showed up at my door this morning." Betty's face went pale, and Claire knew she'd found her answer. Betty's hand went to her chest like she was having trouble breathing. Her eyes darted to the other customers in the store, then back to Claire. Two women by the canned goods suddenly became very interested in soup labels. "Oh dear," Betty whispered. "He actually went?" "Yes, he actually went," Claire said, keeping her voice steady even though she wanted to shout. "And do you know what he said to me?" Betty's face turned redder. "I can imagine." "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I never thought he'd actually do it. I mean, I mentioned you, but I didn't think he'd just show up like that." "You mentioned me?" Claire leaned on the counter. "What exactly did you say?" The older woman wrung her hands, glancing again at the other customers who were now openly listening. This was going to be all over town by dinner time, but Claire didn't care anymore. "He came in about a week ago," Betty said quietly, "for supplies. You know how he is, hardly says two words. But he looked so lonely, Claire, so worn down, and I got to talking like I do, and I mentioned how you were up there all alone, struggling to keep Tom's place going. I said you could use some help, that's all. I thought maybe he'd offer to chop some wood or fix your fence or something neighborly like that." "Neighborly?" Claire repeated, her voice flat. "Betty, he asked to give me sons." One of the women by the soup actually gasped. Betty looked like she might faint. "He what?" "You heard me. Oh no. Oh no, no, no." Betty came around the counter, reaching for Claire's hands. "Honey, I swear I never meant for anything like that. I was just trying to help. You're up there all alone and winter's coming, and that man knows these mountains better than anyone. I thought maybe you two could help each other out, in a normal way." Claire pulled her hands back. Well, he took it a different way. Betty sank onto the stool behind the counter, looking genuinely distressed. "I feel terrible. That man, he's not right in tea. He had when it comes to people. Been alone too long. He doesn't understand how things work anymore." "Tell me about him," Claire said, her anger cooling into curiosity. "Who is he really?" Betty glanced at the other customers, then raised her voice slightly. "Linda, Margaret, this is a private conversation. The two women reluctantly grabbed their items and came to the counter. Betty rang them up quickly, and they left with several backward glances. As soon as the door closed, Betty locked it and flipped the sign to closed. "It's early," Claire said. "Some conversations need privacy." Betty gestured to the back room. "Come on, I'll make us coffee and tell you what I know." Claire followed her into the small office behind the store. It was cluttered with papers, boxes, and photographs covering every wall. Betty poured 2 cups of coffee from an old pot and handed one to Claire. "His name is Daniel," Betty began, settling into a chair. "Daniel Reeves. He's been living up in those mountains for about 8 years now. Before that, he was military. Special forces or something like that. Saw some real bad things overseas." Claire sipped her coffee and listened. "He came back different, they say. Couldn't adjust to normal life. Had nightmares. Couldn't be around people. One day he just packed up and walked into the mountains. Built himself a place up there somewhere, though nobody knows exactly where. He only comes to town maybe once a month for supplies." "Does he have family?" Claire asked. Betty's face softened with sadness. "He did, a wife and a little girl. This was before he went into the mountains. They got sick, both of them. Some kind of flu that went bad. They didn't make it. I think that's partly why he left. Too many memories, too much pain." Claire felt something shift in her chest. That explained the look in his eyes. That deep, familiar sadness. She recognized it because she carried the same weight. "After he left, people mostly left him alone," Betty continued. "But he's not dangerous or anything. Sometimes he helps folks out. Last winter, when the Thompsons' cabin caught fire, he appeared out of nowhere with water and tools. Helped them save half the house, then disappeared again. He fixed the bridge on Old Mill Road after the storm. Didn't ask for a penny. He's good to people in his way, just doesn't know how to be around them anymore. So when you told him about me, I honestly thought I was helping," Betty said miserably. "You're both alone, both hurting, both trying to survive in these hard mountains. I thought maybe you'd understand each other. But I should have known better. That man doesn't think like normal folks anymore. He sees everything as practical, survival, solutions." Claire set down her coffee cup. "What do people say about him in town?" Betty leaned back. "Depends who you ask. Some folks think he's touched in the head. Others respect him for his skills. He knows everything about living off the land, hunting, building, fixing. If anyone can survive a winter with nothing, it's him. Some of the younger men go to him for advice about tracking and such. He teaches them, but he doesn't socialize. Has he ever done this before? Approached a woman like that?" "Never," Betty said firmly. "As far as I know, you're the first person he's talked to about anything personal since he went into the mountains. That's why I feel so terrible. I put ideas in his head, and he acted on them in the only way he knows how. Direct, practical, no social graces whatsoever." Claire sat quietly, processing everything. The morning had started with shock and anger, but now she was seeing a bigger picture. A broken man who'd lost everything just like her. A man who'd forgotten how to connect with people but still carried some instinct to help, to build, to create life in the midst of all that loss. His proposal had been insulting, yes, but it hadn't come from a bad place. It came from someone who genuinely didn't know any other way to reach out. "What are you thinking?" Betty asked carefully. "I don't know," Claire admitted. "Part of me wants to stay angry. Part of me is just tired. And part of me understands why he did it." Betty reached across and squeezed her hand. "You've got a good heart, Claire. Tom always said that about you." The mention of Tom made Claire's eyes sting. "I miss him so much, Betty, every day. And that cabin, it's falling apart. I'm trying so hard to keep it going, to honor what he built, but I don't know how much longer I can do it alone." "Nobody expects you to be Superwoman, honey." "I expect it," Claire said. "I have to prove I can do this. That his dream doesn't die just because he did." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the afternoon sun was starting to slide behind the mountains. Claire needed to get back before dark. The road up was treacherous enough in daylight. "What are you going to do?" Betty asked. "About Daniel, I mean." "I don't know," Claire said honestly. "Maybe nothing. Maybe he'll stay away now." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure that's what she wanted. The encounter had been strange and inappropriate, yes, but it had also broken up the loneliness, the monotony of her days. It had reminded her that other people existed in the world, that she wasn't completely alone in her struggle. She finished her coffee and stood. "I should get back," Betty walked her to the door, unlocking it. "Claire, if you need anything at all, you call me. And I'm sorry again. I was trying to help, but I went about it all wrong." "I know," Claire said. "You meant well." She walked back to her truck, aware of eyes watching from windows. The story would spread fast. By tomorrow, everyone in Pine Ridge would know about the mountain man's visit. They'd whisper and speculate. Some would judge her, others would judge him. That was the price of living in a small town. The drive back up the mountain gave her time to think. The sun painted the trees in golden light, and the air smelled like pine and autumn. She'd always loved this land. She and Tom had chosen it together, had imagined growing old here, maybe raising children here. But life had other plans. As she pulled up to the cabin, Claire noticed something on her porch. She parked and walked over carefully. It was a stack of firewood, good dry wood neatly arranged, and on top of it a piece of paper weighted down with a stone. Claire picked up the paper. The handwriting was rough but clear. "I apologize for my words. They were wrong. The wood is freely given. You owe me nothing, no signature." But she knew who it was from. Claire looked out toward the tree line, toward the mountains where Daniel lived somewhere in the wild. She couldn't see him, but she had the feeling he might be watching, making sure she got home safe. She picked up an armload of the wood and carried it inside. It was good wood, perfectly cut and seasoned. The work of someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who understood what it took to survive a mountain winter. That night, as the fire crackled in her stove, Claire found herself thinking about Daniel Reeves, not with anger anymore, but with something more complicated. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. Two broken people, trying to survive in the only ways they knew how. She looked at the note again before tucking it into her journal. An apology from a man who didn't know how to apologize. Wood from someone who spoke better through actions than words. Maybe Betty had been right in a strange way. Maybe they could help each other. Not in the way Daniel had proposed, that was still absurd, but in some other way, some way that honored their grief while letting them keep living. Claire wasn't sure what that would look like, but for the first time in 2 years she felt something besides exhaustion and sadness. She felt curious about what came next. Outside, the mountains stood silent and knowing, keeping their secrets. And somewhere in those mountains, a man who'd forgotten how to be around people was probably wondering if he'd ruined his only chance at connection. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was only the beginning. 3 days passed after the firewood appeared on Claire's porch. 3 days of her trying to focus on work while her mind kept wandering to that note. To those words scratched in rough handwriting. She'd told herself to forget about it, to move on, but forgetting wasn't as easy as she'd hoped. The roof was still leaking. Every time it rained, she had to set out buckets to catch the drips. She'd tried to patch it herself, but she wasn't tall enough to reach the worst spots safely, and she didn't have the right materials anyway. Money was tight, and hiring someone from town would cost more than she had. On the 4th morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. Claire shot out of bed, heart racing. Someone was on her roof. She pulled on her clothes quickly and grabbed the baseball bat Tom had kept by the door. As she stepped outside, she looked up and froze. Daniel was on her roof, replacing shingles. He worked steadily, methodically, like he'd done this 1,000 times. A ladder leaned against the house, and supplies were stacked neatly on the ground. "What are you doing?" Claire called up. He paused, hammer in hand, and looked down at her. "Your roof is leaking. I'm fixing it." "I didn't ask you to do that." "I know." He went back to hammering. Claire stood there, bat in hand, unsure what to do. Part of her wanted to tell him to leave, but another part of her, the practical part that was tired of emptying buckets every time it rained, wanted to let him finish. "Did Betty send you?" she asked. "No." He positioned another shingle. "I came on my own. You need help. I can provide it." No strings attached this time. The memory of his first visit hung between them. Claire set down the bat and crossed her arms, watching him work. He moved with confidence, with skill, every action precise and purposeful. "Why?" she asked finally. Daniel paused again, this time longer. He sat back on his heels, looking out at the mountains before looking down at her. "Because I made a mistake. I scared you. I said things that were wrong. This is how I apologize. You already left firewood. That wasn't enough." He gestured at the roof. "This needs to be done before the snow comes. You can't do it alone. The men in town charge too much, so I'm doing it." Claire felt her defenses weakening. I can't pay you. I don't want payment. Then what do you want? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rougher than before. I don't know. Maybe just to do something good. Maybe to not feel useless for once. Something in his tone made Claire's chest tighten. She heard the loneliness in those words. The same loneliness she felt every single day. Two people carrying the same weight, just in different ways. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. He gave a single nod and went back to work. Claire went inside and made coffee. She poured 2 cups and brought one out, setting it on the porch railing where he could reach it when he came down. Then she went about her morning chores, trying to act normal while very aware of the man working above her head. By midday, he'd finished the roof. He climbed down the ladder, his hands dirty and his shirt damp with sweat despite the cool air. Claire brought out sandwiches and water without saying anything. He looked surprised but accepted them with a quiet thank you. They ate on the porch steps, not talking. The silence wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't terrible either. It was the silence of 2 people who'd both forgotten how to make small talk, sitting together in the awkwardness of it. Your husband built this cabin, Daniel said finally, his eyes on the surrounding trees. Yes, took him 3 years. He did good work. Strong foundation. Good bones, Claire smiled sadly. He was proud of it. Said it would stand for 100 years. Daniel nodded. It will, if it's maintained properly. That's the problem, Claire admitted. I don't know how to maintain it all. I'm trying, but there's always something breaking, something needing attention. I'm drowning in work I don't know how to do. Daniel turned to look at her. Really look at her. His eyes were dark brown, she noticed. Deep and serious. I could teach you. Teach me? How to maintain it. How to fix things. How to prepare for winter properly. He hesitated. I know I approached everything wrong before, but the offer to help was real. Not the other stuff, that was stupid, but the help, that was real. Claire studied him. In the daylight, he looked less intimidating than he had in the fog. Still big, still rough around the edges, but there was something genuine in his face. Something honest. Why would you do that? She asked. Daniel looked down at his hands. They were scarred, calloused. The hands of someone who worked hard every day. I've been alone for 8 years. Up in those mountains, not talking to anyone. Not being part of anything. I thought that's what I wanted. Peace, quiet, no complications. He paused, struggling with the words. But lately I don't know. It feels empty. And when Betty told me about you, about someone else who was alone and struggling, I thought maybe we could help each other. But I went about it in the worst way possible. I'm not good with people anymore. I don't know the right things to say. You're doing okay right now, Claire said softly. He looked at her, surprised. Really? Really? This, what you're doing now, this is how normal people help each other, not that other thing. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Yeah, I figured that out after you slammed the door on me. Claire found herself almost smiling back. Can you blame me? No, you should have done worse. They sat quietly again. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. The mountains stretched out before them, endless and ancient. Claire had been looking at this view every day for years, but somehow it looked different with someone else beside her. Okay, she said, making a decision. You can teach me. But we need rules. Rules? Yes, first you ask before you show up. No more surprise repairs. Agreed. Second, this is a working arrangement. You teach me what I need to know. I'll provide meals when you're here. That's it. That's fair. Third, if either of us feels uncomfortable or wants to stop, we can. No questions asked, Daniel nodded. I can work with that. Claire held out her hand. Then we have a deal. He looked at her hand for a moment, then shook it. His grip was strong but careful, like he was aware of his own strength and trying not to use all of it. When do we start? Claire asked. Now if you want. Winter's coming fast. There's a lot to do. So they started. Daniel walked her around the property, pointing out things that needed attention. The fence posts that were rotting. The shed door that was hanging crooked. The water pump that was making strange noises. The list was overwhelming, but he broke it down into priorities. First, we winterize, he said. Make sure you have enough firewood, that your water won't freeze, that your animals are protected. Then we work on the other stuff. I'll never learn all this, Claire said, feeling defeated. Yes, you will, one thing at a time. He showed her how to properly stack firewood so it would stay dry. how to check the chimney for blockages, how to insulate pipes. He explained everything clearly, patiently, and he made her do the work herself while he watched. "You need to learn by doing," he said, "not by watching me do it." The afternoon passed quickly. Claire's hands got dirty. Her back got sore. But she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Capable. Like maybe she could actually do this. As the sun started to set, Daniel gathered his tools. "I should go." "Wait," Claire said. She'd been thinking about something all afternoon. "Where do you live exactly?" Betty said somewhere in the mountains, but where? Daniel pointed northwest toward the highest peaks. "About 2 hours that way." "On foot? That's far. And you walked here?" "I'm used to it." "Will you make it back before dark?" He smiled slightly. "I know these mountains better than I know anything. I'll be fine." Claire walked him to the edge of her property. "Thank you. For the roof, for the lessons, for all of it?" "You're welcome." He paused like he wanted to say something else but wasn't sure how. "What is it?" Claire asked. "I was wondering if I could come back. Tomorrow, maybe? There's more to do." "Yes," Claire said. "Come back tomorrow." "But Daniel?" "Yeah?" Knock first, he actually laughed. It was a rusty sound like he hadn't laughed in years, but it was real. "I promise." Claire watched him disappear into the tree line, moving with the confidence of someone who belonged to the wild. Then she turned back to her cabin, to the repaired roof and the stacked firewood and all the work still ahead. She felt exhausted. But underneath the exhaustion was something new. Hope, maybe, or possibility. The sense that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do everything alone. That night she sat by the fire and thought about the strange turn her life had taken. A week ago, a mountain man had knocked on her door with the most inappropriate proposal she'd ever heard. Now that same man was teaching her how to survive, how to take care of herself and her home, how to be strong in ways she didn't know she needed to be. Life was strange sometimes, painful and beautiful and unexpected all at once. Claire looked at Tom's picture on the mantel. "I think you'd like him," she said softly. "He's rough around the edges, but he's good. He's helping me keep your dream alive." The fire crackled in response, and outside the mountains stood watch over them all. November came with snow and cold winds that rattled the windows. Daniel had been coming to the cabin 3 times a week for almost 2 months now, always knocking first like he'd promised. The awkwardness between them had slowly melted away, replaced by something easier. Friendship, maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. He'd taught Claire how to split wood properly, how to repair the fence, how to fix the water pump when it acted up. She'd learned to start the generator, to preserve food for winter, to track the weather by watching the sky. Her hands had calluses now, and her back was stronger. She felt capable in ways she never had before. But more than the skills, it was the company she'd come to value, having someone to talk to, someone who understood what it meant to carry loss and keep going anyway. They didn't talk about their pain directly, but it was there between them, acknowledged in the quiet moments. Today, Daniel was teaching her how to make repairs on the shed. The roof had a weak spot, and he wanted her to know how to handle it before the heavy snows came. "See this beam?" he said, pointing. "It's starting to rot here. You need to replace it before it gives way." Claire nodded, studying the wood. "How do I know when something needs replacing versus just reinforcing?" "Feel it. If it's soft when you press, if it crumbles, it's too far gone. If it's still solid but weakened, you can reinforce it." She pressed her thumb against the beam and felt it give slightly. "So this one needs replacing?" "Yes, good eye." They worked together, removing the old beam and fitting a new one. Daniel let her do most of the work, only stepping in when she needed an extra set of hands. He was patient, never making her feel stupid when she asked questions. "You're a good teacher," Claire said as they secured the new beam in place. "You're a good student." He handed her the hammer. "Finish securing it." As she worked, Claire found herself watching him from the corner of her eye. He was different from how he'd been that first morning in the fog. Less guarded. He smiled more, though it was still rare. Sometimes he'd tell her stories about his time in the mountains, about tracking deer or finding a bear's den or watching eagles hunt. He never talked about his time in the military, though, or about his wife and daughter. Claire didn't push. She had her own topics she didn't want to discuss either. "Done," she said, stepping back to admire their work. Daniel inspected it, testing the strength. "Solid, this'll hold for years." They headed back to the cabin as snow started to fall, big fat flakes that stuck to their hair and shoulders. Inside, Claire put on coffee while Daniel added wood to the fire. This had become their routine. Work, then coffee, then he'd head back to his place before dark. "Storm's coming," Daniel said, looking out the window. "Big one. You can feel it in the air." "How big?" "Could be 3-4 feet of snow. Maybe more. You'll need to stay inside for a few days until it passes." Claire felt a flutter of anxiety. "Will you be okay up there?" "I always am. But you need to be prepared. Do you have enough firewood inside? Enough food?" "I think so. Show me." They went through her supplies together. She had plenty of wood stacked on the porch, canned goods in the pantry, water stored. Daniel nodded approvingly. "You're ready. But I want you to bring more wood inside tonight. Stack it by the door. Keep the fire going strong, and don't try to go out during the worst of it even if you think you hear something." "What would I hear?" "Wind can play tricks, make you think there's someone calling for help, or an animal in trouble." "Stay inside. Promise me." The intensity in his voice surprised her. "I promise." He relaxed slightly. "Good." The snow was falling harder now, the wind picking up. Daniel looked troubled as he stared out the window. "You should stay," Claire said suddenly. He turned to her. "What?" "Stay here tonight. It's already getting bad out there. You said yourself the storm is coming. Your place is 2 hours away. That's dangerous. I've walked through worse." "I know, but you don't have to. I have a spare room. It's small, but it's warm and dry. You can head back when the storm passes." Daniel hesitated, clearly torn. "I don't want to impose. You've been helping me for 2 months. You've taught me everything I need to know to survive here. The least I can do is offer you shelter during a storm." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, thank you." That evening was strange. Having someone else in the cabin after so long alone felt both comfortable and unsettling. Claire made dinner, a simple stew with bread. They ate at the small table, the wind howling outside. "This is good," Daniel said. "Better than anything I cook." "What do you eat up there?" "Whatever I hunt or trap. Some dried goods. It's functional, not fancy. Don't you get lonely?" The question slipped out before Claire could stop it. She saw Daniel stiffen and she immediately regretted asking. "Sorry," she said. "That's too personal." "No, it's okay." He set down his spoon. "Yeah, I get lonely. That's why I started coming to town more often. Why I jumped at Betty's suggestion about you. I'd convinced myself I wanted to be alone. But humans aren't meant to live in complete isolation. We need connection, even those of us who are broken." Claire's throat tightened. "I understand that. The loneliness. It's like a weight you carry everywhere. Does it get easier?" Daniel asked quietly. "The grief? I don't know. It's different, I guess. The sharp edges smooth out, but it's always there. Like a scar." "I still see them sometimes," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wife and daughter. In dreams mostly. Sometimes I wake up and forget they're gone. Then I remember, and it's like losing them all over again." Claire reached across the table and put her hand over his. "I'm sorry." He looked at their hands, then up at her face. "I'm sorry, too. About Tom, about all of it." They sat like that for a moment. Two wounded people offering each other the only comfort they could. Understanding. Presence. The acknowledgement that pain was real and valid and shared. The storm raged through the night. Claire lay in her bed listening to the wind scream and the cabin creak. She thought about Daniel in the spare room, wondered if he was sleeping or staring at the ceiling like she was. Around midnight, she heard a crash from outside. Then another. Something was wrong. Claire jumped out of bed and ran to the window. In the darkness and swirling snow, she could barely see anything. But it sounded like part of the fence had given way. She was pulling on her coat when Daniel appeared in the doorway. "Already dressed. Don't go out there," he said firmly. "But the fence, it can wait until morning. The storm's too dangerous, but the chickens are in their coop, which is sturdy. They'll be fine." "You won't be if you go out there and get lost in the snow." Claire knew he was right, but the urge to fix things, to not let anything else fall apart, was overwhelming. She felt tears of frustration building. "Hey," Daniel said softly, stepping closer. "It's okay. Things break. That's part of living out here. We'll fix it in the morning together, but you have to be alive to fix it." "I just feel so helpless," Claire said, the words tumbling out. "Like no matter what I do, something else goes wrong. I'm trying so hard to keep this place going, to honor Tom's dream, but maybe I'm fooling myself. Maybe I can't do this. You are doing this, Daniel said. Look at everything you've learned. Everything you've accomplished. 2 months ago you couldn't split wood or fix a roof or winterize a cabin. Now you can do all of that. You're stronger than you think. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about never being scared or tired or frustrated. It's about keeping going anyway. Claire wiped her eyes, feeling embarrassed. I'm sorry. I don't usually fall apart like this. Everyone falls apart sometimes. That's okay. They stood there in the dark cabin, the storm raging outside, and Claire realized how much had changed in 2 months. This man who'd knocked on her door with that absurd proposal had become her friend. Her teacher. Someone she trusted. Thank you, she said, for everything. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do. You've given me so much. Skills, yes, but more than that. You've reminded me that I don't have to do everything alone, that asking for help isn't weakness. Daniel was quiet for a moment. You've given me something too. What? A reason to be around people again. A purpose. For 8 years I just existed, but these past 2 months, teaching you, helping you, I've felt alive again. Like maybe I'm not completely broken after all. The words hung in the air between them. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside, something shifted. Something neither of them was quite ready to name. We should try to sleep, Claire said finally. Morning will come eventually. Yeah, but neither of them moved. They stood there in the darkness, two people who'd been alone for so long they'd forgotten what connection felt like. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility and fear in equal measure. Finally, Daniel stepped back. Good night, Claire. Good night. He returned to the spare room and Claire climbed back into bed. But sleep didn't come easily. She lay awake, thinking about the look in Daniel's eyes, the way his voice had changed when he said she'd given him something too. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had expected or planned for, and Claire wasn't sure if that was wonderful or terrifying. Maybe it was both. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Claire and Daniel dug out together, then repaired the fence section that had collapsed. They worked in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized after so many weeks of working together. When Daniel finally headed home that afternoon, Claire watched him disappear into the white landscape. And for the first time since Tom died, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow, to the next time someone would knock on her door, not out of obligation or survival, but because she genuinely wanted the company. Because somewhere along the way, Daniel had become more than just her teacher. He'd become someone she cared about, and that scared her more than any storm ever could. December brought deeper snows and shorter days, and with them, a quiet shift in the air between Claire and Daniel. He still came 3 times a week, but now the lessons felt less like teaching and more like excuses to spend time together. They both knew it, though neither said it out loud. Claire found herself preparing for his visits differently now. She'd catch herself checking her reflection in the mirror, brushing her hair one extra time, wearing the sweater that still looked decent instead of the old work clothes. Small things that made her feel foolish and hopeful at the same time. Daniel had changed too. He smiled more easily. Sometimes he'd bring things from the forest, little gifts, pine cones arranged in interesting patterns, a piece of wood shaped like a heart by nature, once a handful of winter berries that the birds hadn't found yet. For color, he'd said, looking embarrassed. Everything's so white right now. Claire had put them in a jar on the windowsill, and every time she looked at them, she felt something warm bloom in her chest. The town had noticed too. During her weekly trip to Betty's store, the older woman had pulled her aside with knowing eyes. So, Betty had said, you and Daniel seem to be getting along. He's teaching me things. That's all. And does he teach all his students to smile like that? Claire had felt her face heat up. I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't, honey. Betty had patted her arm. For what it's worth, I think it's wonderful. You both deserve some happiness, but happiness felt complicated. Claire still loved Tom. His picture was still on the mantel, and she still talked to it sometimes. The guilt of feeling something for someone else sat heavy in her stomach. Even though she knew, logically, that Tom would want her to live, to find joy again. Grief and new feelings tangled together like thorns and flowers, beautiful and painful at once. One afternoon in mid-December, Daniel arrived looking troubled. Claire knew him well enough now to read the tension in his shoulders. the way he moved a little too carefully like he was holding something fragile. "What's wrong?" she asked as he came inside. He removed his heavy coat slowly. "I need to ask you something." "Okay, spring is coming. In a few months the snow will melt and life will be easier. You've learned a lot. You can handle most things on your own now." Claire felt her stomach drop. "Are you saying you won't come anymore?" "I'm asking what you want." He turned to face her fully. "I come here because I want to. Not because you need me to, but I need to know if you want me to keep coming. If this is just about survival skills or if it's something more." The question hung between them. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it. She'd been avoiding this moment, this conversation, but here it was, unavoidable. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I'm confused, Daniel. I care about you. More than I expected to. But I feel guilty about it. Like I'm betraying Tom. I understand." Daniel sat down heavily. "I feel the same way about my wife. Like moving forward means leaving her behind. But we're not leaving them behind, are we? They're just not here anymore." "No, they're not." They sat in silence for a long moment. The fire crackled. Outside, snow fell gently, endlessly. "I think about you when you're not here," Claire admitted quietly. "I look forward to your visits. Not just for the help, but because I like being around you. You make me feel less alone. You make me feel human again," Daniel said. "For 8 years, I was just surviving. Now I'm living. That's because of you. So what do we do?" Daniel stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "I don't know. I'm not good at this. Relationships, feelings, all of it. I proved that pretty clearly when I knocked on your door that first day." Despite everything, Claire smiled. "That was pretty bad." He turned, and there was the ghost of a smile on his face, too. "Worst proposal in history. Definitely top 10. They looked at each other, and something in the air shifted. Daniel took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "Claire," he said, his voice rough, "I don't want to rush anything. I don't want to push you into something you're not ready for. But I need you to know that I care about you, more than I've cared about anyone in a very long time." Claire's heart hammered in her chest. She stood and walked to him, closing the distance between them. "I care about you too, and I'm scared. And I don't know if I'm ready, but I don't want you to stop coming here. I won't. Not unless you tell me to. Then don't." They stood close, not quite touching, both of them afraid to take the next step. It was Daniel who moved first, reaching out to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was rough, calloused, but his touch was careful, reverent. "Can I hold you?" he asked softly. Claire nodded, not trusting her voice. Daniel pulled her into his arms, and Claire pressed her face against his chest. He was warm and solid and real. She could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong, and for the first time in years she felt safe in a way that had nothing to do with locked doors or survival skills. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other while the snow fell outside and the fire burned low. That night they talked until late. Really talked, about their pasts and their fears and their hopes. Daniel told her about his wife, about how they'd met young and built a life together, about his daughter's laugh and the way she'd loved collecting rocks, about the day they'd gotten sick and how helpless he'd felt. Claire told him about Tom, about their dreams for the cabin, about the accident that had taken him and how she'd nearly given up in those first months, about the guilt she felt for still being here when he wasn't. "They wouldn't want us to stop living," Daniel said. "If the situation was reversed, would you want Tom to be alone forever?" "No," Claire admitted. "I'd want him to be happy. Then maybe they'd want the same for us." It was a simple thought, but it settled something in Claire's heart. Permission to move forward. Permission to live. The weeks that followed were careful, tentative. They didn't rush. Daniel still came 3 times a week, but now they spent less time working and more time just being together, cooking meals, sitting by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they held hands. Once Daniel kissed her forehead as he was leaving, and Claire had touched the spot afterward, feeling something like happiness bloom where grief had lived for so long. The town continued to watch and whisper, but Claire found she didn't care anymore. Let them talk. She was building something real with someone who understood her, who saw her scars and didn't look away. In late January, Daniel brought her to his place for the first time. It was a 2-hour hike through deep snow, but Claire was strong enough now to make the journey. His cabin was smaller than hers, but beautifully crafted, every detail thoughtful. He'd built it himself, he explained, after he'd left civilization behind. It's amazing, Claire said, turning in a circle to take it all in. It's lonely, Daniel said. I built it to be alone in. But I don't want to be alone anymore. Claire looked at him, at this man who'd knocked on her door with the worst proposal in history, and had somehow become the person who made her want to wake up in the morning. You don't have to be, she said. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe when spring comes we figure out what this is. Really figure it out. No more being scared. No more holding back. Daniel crossed the room and cupped her face in his hands. Are you sure? I'm sure that I want to try. I'm sure that you make me happy. I'm sure that I don't want to live alone in that cabin anymore if there's another option. What would Tom think? Claire smiled, tears in her eyes. I think he'd say I was stubborn for waiting this long. Daniel laughed, and it was a full, real laugh, not the rusty sound from before. Then he kissed her, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When spring finally came, melting the snow and bringing life back to the mountains, Daniel moved most of his things to Claire's cabin. They kept his place as a retreat, somewhere to go when they needed solitude, but they built their life together in the cabin Tom had made. It wasn't always easy. They both still had nightmares. They both still had days where grief hit hard and unexpected. But they had each other to lean on, and that made all the difference. Claire planted a garden that first spring, and Daniel built a bigger chicken coop. Together they repaired and improved the property, making it truly theirs while honoring what Tom had started. The town eventually stopped gossiping and started accepting. Betty, of course, took credit for the whole thing. I knew they were perfect for each other, she'd say to anyone who'd listen. Just needed a little push in the right direction. Claire and Daniel would roll their eyes, but they'd also smile. Because in her own meddling way, Betty had been right. They had needed each other, even if the beginning had been absolutely ridiculous. One evening in May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple, Daniel took Claire's hand. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Letting the weird mountain man into your life? Every day, Claire said with a straight face. Then she smiled. I'm joking, no, not once. Even though I showed up and said the stupidest thing ever, especially because of that. It makes for a great story. The story of how I knocked on your door and declared I'd give you sons like some kind of caveman? That's the one. They laughed together, the sound carrying across the quiet land. Two broken people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, who'd built something beautiful from grief and awkwardness and unexpected connection. The mountains stood around them, ancient and knowing. And in the cabin that Tom built, Claire and Daniel built something new. Not a replacement for what they'd lost, but something that honored it while allowing them to live again. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was a good life, a real life. And sometimes, Claire thought, the best things came from the most unexpected beginnings, even from a knock on the door and the worst proposal in the history of the mountains.